Miracle 11. Smuggler's Destiny. In the early 70s, President Richard Nixon formalized relations with China through a visit to Beijing and a meeting with Mao Zedong. Not long thereafter, word was out that Westerners could travel to the nation for the first time in decades. Those of us in the Christian world were desperate to know the state of believers in that nation, since Chairman Mao and his minions had slaughtered hundreds of thousands in mass murders of followers of Jesus Christ. We had heard the stories from escaping Chinese believers of the underground church and of the persecution of the faithful. We knew Bibles were extremely scarce due to the repeated cultural revolutions which sought to eliminate any vestige of the Christian faith, an opiate of the people. In 1979, Andrew, a China-born member of the staff of our organization, had a vision to enter the nation with a group of American tourists. We would, he proposed, attempt to link up with members of the underground church for potential support for these hurting brothers and sisters in the faith. With a group of about 20, he suggested that we each carry 2 or 3 Bibles in our suitcases with the possibility that we might give them out in China. Technically, this was smuggling, but hardly on a massive scale. We had 50 Bibles among us, and had some expectation that they might be confiscated in customs, a common occurrence. We also knew from reports that members of Intourist, the Chinese Secret Service, would be with us as tour guides and security. We just had no idea until we got there that the scrutiny would be so close or so constant. Every bus ride, every meal, every tourist site, and every hotel lobby was marked by the soon familiar faces of the blue-gray uniformed spies for the People's Republic of China. In the 2 weeks of the trip to the Great Wall, the tombs of the emperors, and other famous sites, there were 0 opportunities to meet Christians, get inside churches, or communicate with anyone outside the protected zone of our Chinese observers. We all prayed that somehow we would be able to deliver the 50 Bibles. We surely didn't want to take them back to the U.S., and it was now the day before our departure. The tour guides had saved the best for last in Beijing. The final feature was a tour of the walled Imperial Palace from the Ming Dynasty to the end of the Qing Dynasty, a huge network of palaces called the Forbidden City. As we disembarked from the bus to enter the gate of the city on our final day in China, our guide told us to stay with the group so we wouldn't get lost, and that we would meet at 4 o'clock at the bus outside the gate on the far wall from which we entered. It was a beautiful sunny day with clear skies, and as the tour began, I loaded a fresh roll of film into my camera to record the magnificent surroundings. Divine mistake. About 30 minutes into the tour, I realized that the film in my camera had not engaged the sprockets, and that all the pictures I thought I had taken had recorded nothing. I panicked and reloaded my camera. I figured that I could run back to the entry gate, retake all of the shots I had lost, and catch up to the slow-moving group tour. So I split from the group and, in the process, apparently eluded the watchful eyes of our Chinese monitors. When I returned to the site where I had left the group, it was nowhere to be found. No problem, I thought. I know the time and place of the bus departure. I'm on my own. I finished photographing the rest of the magnificent palace structures and exited the back gate with about an hour to spare before I had to be back on the bus. Outside the back gate I spied a tall 4-story pagoda on a hill about a quarter of a mile away through a park and thought, what a magnificent place to get a picture of the entire palace enclosure and the city of Beijing. I raced along the sidewalks of the park and ascended the many steps to the top level of the pagoda. Spectacular view indeed. Each level of the pagoda was filled with Chinese nationals wearing their standard blue-gray pajama-like clothing. The tall American with the fancy camera and long telephoto lens was clearly a fascination to the populace. As I snapped pictures of the sights, I recorded my impressions in a small, handheld cassette tape recorder. I was in a world of my own. My world was suddenly shaken by a voice close to me which said, "Are you a visitor to our country?" The voice was strong and in perfect English. I turned, expecting to see a British or American national, and instead was face to face with a mid-70s woman dressed in the standard blue-grays. Shocked at the discovery, I blurted out, "Where did you learn such perfect English?" "In mission school," she replied, and all the bells and whistles in my soul sounded. In the next few moments of conversation, during which she kept looking around to see who was watching her talk to the American, I learned that she was from Shanghai and was on a short visit to Beijing. She had just happened to take a walk to the park and was up on the pagoda at the very moment I was away from my group for the first time in 2 weeks. Most important, I learned that she was a devout follower of Jesus Christ. The Bible Connection. I asked if she had a Bible. She said she had one, but that they weren't available. Her pastor didn't even own one, and members of her church had only hand-copied scripture portions. I told her I could get some for her. She repeated that you couldn't get them. I repeated that I had 50 Bibles, and that if she could arrange a secret place to meet and pick them up, I would give them to her. Her response was heartbreaking. First, she looked around again to see if anyone was observing our conversation. Then she looked at me with longing in her eyes, as if to say, "You wouldn't be toying with me, would you?" Then she said we must leave that spot immediately, walk a pace or two apart, and not look at each other, so it would not be so obvious that we were conversing. We did this down the long, winding walk to the wall of the Forbidden City. The bus was by the gate, so I told her, "Stay right here around the corner from this wall. I will send someone." Mystified but obviously willing to risk that what I was telling her might actually be true, she stayed put. Running to the bus, I cornered Andrew, who was fluent in Mandarin. "Andrew, go quickly to the woman around the corner. She can arrange to take the Bibles." Like a flash, Andrew was gone, and just as quickly he was back. "It's all arranged," he said, with a smile as broad as the horizon. That evening, during free time between dinner and the evening schedule at the hotel, the members of the team quietly dropped off the Bibles from their luggage at Andrew's room. He packed them into an old suitcase and disappeared into the shadows behind the hotel. He came back more excited than if he'd won the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. "It worked! We met and she took them," he announced with exultation. "But I feel so sorry for that weak old lady. That suitcase was so heavy." "Andrew, get over it," I rebuked with a smile. "That was the lightest load she's carried in her entire life." We laughed together at the thought. What a string of linking factors. The day before our departure, the jammed camera film, my separation from the group and the state watchdogs, the visit to the top level of the pagoda, the woman's brief visit to Beijing from Shanghai and her stroll to the park and up the pagoda, her speaking to the only American stranger there. All of this ended in, who knows, maybe 50 different house church pastors getting their first copy of the Holy Bible. I'd love to know. It would be difficult to convince the recipients of those Bibles and that dear lady that all this wasn't miraculous.